Good afternoon and welcome to the seventh annual Defending the Early Years Summer Institute. My name is Denisha Jones, and I currently serve as the Executive Director of Defending the Early Years and your Summer Institute moderator. The annual DEY Summer Institute brings together early childhood educators and advocates from across the country to develop a thoughtful and dynamic grassroots advocacy platform and action steps that support the whole child, respect child development, and recognize the importance of play so that all children may experience a just and equitable quality education and future. This year's theme is equity, truth, and care, applying early childhood values to global challenges. When we began planning for this year's Summer Institute, we had no idea what challenges we would be facing. We had no way of knowing that we might be on the brink of war with Iran, or that the people of Los Angeles would take to the streets to protest abductions of their immigrant neighbors, or that the National Guard and Marines would be deployed in an American city against the wishes of the state's elected officials. Though we could not predict what would happen, we recognized that the challenges we currently face would still be there, and they would likely intensify and be met with new challenges. The uncertainty we faced led us to ask, what role can early childhood education and care serve in helping us to address an uncertain future? This Summer Institute explores how the core values of our field can guide us in preparing for an unpredictable future. Inspired by the sentiment in Robert Fulghum's Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, this Summer Institute proposes that everything we need to face the future comes from our early childhood education and care values. In times of uncertainty, our commitment to ensuring a just and equitable early childhood for all children must remain steadfast. When the future threatens to reshape our world, our shared values can ground us in what all children fundamentally need and deserve. This year, we invite you to join us as we explore how our commitment to the values of equity, truth, and care can support our efforts to resist threats of domination, control, power, racism, white supremacy, climate disaster, and environmental terrorism. Now more than ever, we must double down on what we know constitutes high quality early childhood education and care. Today, our focus is on equity. How can a commitment to equity support our efforts to resist threats of power, domination, and control? Every day, we fight for a just and equitable early childhood education for all children. We recognize that equity, ensuring that every child has what they need, is key to fostering whole child development. In a society entrenched in inequality, we must value equity as the only path forward. Before we introduce today's keynote, I want to review a few logistics. Again, I want to welcome the audience. Thank you for joining us. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, share your name, share where you're from, share your pronouns, and feel free to dialogue with each other in the chat as well. First, you should know we're recording this webinar and it is being broadcast live to our Facebook page. Next week, we will share the recordings with everyone who registered and on our website. Would you like to receive a certificate of completion? Click on the link shared in the comments to complete the form, and our project coordinator, Zoe Kim, will send you a certificate. Did you receive our reflective workbook? This morning, we sent an email that included a link to our Summer Institute reflective workbook, which we will also share in the comments. Fill out the workbook and send it back to us, and you can gain 3 extra hours on your certificate of completion at the end of the Institute. Do you have questions, or will you have questions for our panelists? Please submit your question in the Q&A section. See that Q&A on the bottom of your screen with a question mark in the box? That's the Q&A. That's where you go and submit your questions for our panelists. Please don't put your questions in the comments because the comments are going to be moving really fast and we won't be able to go back and find them. But our staff will be able to go through all the questions in the Q&A and help us as we get to that time later today, where we will save time for audience dialogue. All right, now I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Rose Marie Allen. Dr. Allen has served as an educational leader for over 40 years. Her life's work is centered on ensuring all children have access to high quality early childhood programs that are developmentally appropriate and culturally sustaining. She is currently a professor at the School of Education at Metropolitan State University of Denver. Her classes are focused on ensuring teachers are aware of how issues of equity, power, and justice impact teaching practices. Dr. Allen also serves as the president and CEO of the Institute for Racial Equity and Excellence, IREE, which is the lead agency for ensuring equity in organizations throughout the nation and internationally. You can read more about Dr. Allen on our Summer Institute webpage with the link in the comments. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rosemary Allen for our opening keynote.
Thank you so much, Denisha. And I just want to take just a second to applaud defending the early years for saying equity. We know that's a hot button word right now, and I am very pleased that I'm here to talk about it. And I also want to say hello to all my friends that I see in the chat box as well. We're going to get started. I will be sharing my screen, and I can't see you, and I will not be responding to chats, to the chat box. As Denisha said, Q&A. There's a Q&A section and questions will be answered later. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about equity, which I'm very, very, very excited to do. But before we start, let's just get on the same page around definitions. Inequality. We all know that inequality is wrong. That's unequal access to opportunities. And in an effort to really address inequality, then there was a push for equality. And today, the biggest argument is that we don't believe in equity, we believe in equality. But look what happens with equality, that you give people the same tools and the same resources, but the tree is bent. And the tree is bent in a way that really does not promote equality. Then we get here to equity. And that's customizing the tools that identify and address inequality. But when you look at this, equity is an action word, it is a verb, it is what we do. And even though we engage in equity, it's still not enough. The outcome of our equitable practices, this being a verb, is justice. And that means fixing the system so that everyone has equal access to both tools and opportunities. I want you to look carefully at the ladders. When we engage in equity with the outcome of justice, then we can get to equality. It is not until that happens. So when people are pushing now for equality, that's what we want. But there's a process to get there. And one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that we cannot talk about equity without talking about race. And people say to me all the time, Rosemary, it's not only about race, it's about class, it's about SES, it's about ability. It's not only about race, but it is always about race. Always, always, always. Because on every single indicator of child well-being, Black and brown children are at the bottom, and Black children are at the very bottom. So, in order to talk about equity, we have to understand so much of it is a racial problem. So, how does this show up in early childhood spaces? People say, well, when does equity start or inequity start? Inequities start before the child is even born. We know that Blacks and Latinas experience higher rates of preterm birth, gestational diabetes, hypertension, fetal death, maternal death, and stillborns than white women. So we know that inequities begin before birth, and we know that they persist throughout the child's life. For example, we know that across all early childhood settings, we see about 250 children who are suspended or expelled every single day. We also know that preschool children are 3 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers. But when we talk about equity or inequities in suspensions, we have to pay attention to who's being suspended. Who's being suspended? Because we also know that there are inequities in disciplinary actions. We know that boys are suspended a lot more than girls. We know that American Indian and Alaska Native children are also disproportionately suspended. Their girls are almost 4 times more likely to be suspended than girls the same age. We know that children with disabilities are suspended. There were only 22% of the total enrollment in Part B, but nearly 60% of those who were expelled. Latino children are also disproportionately suspended, especially boys. Little Black girls are suspended more than any other female demographic. They're only 20% of the preschool female population, but more than half of girls who are suspended. And the top two reasons they're suspended is because of what we call sassiness, or what some of us call Black girl magic, and because of their hair. Because of infractions against dress codes, people touching their hair and them defending their bodies because hair is attached to a body and you should never touch it without consent. And I can never, ever, ever present without talking about the number one rule about Black hair, and it is that you do not touch it. And I have teachers say, well, children are naturally curious and they just want to feel it. We need to teach children consent. Do not touch a person's body unless they give you permission. We also know that little Black boys, well, not just little Black boys, all Black boys are the most suspended demographic in all of America and actually around the world. So we know there's disparities, there's disproportionality in suspensions and expulsions. I want us to also understand that the suspensions and expulsions are usually the final act. There's a lot of disparities in how children of color are treated, that they are punished more, their names are called more, they are excluded from activities more, and in many, many cases, they become victims of a hostile classroom, not only from the teachers, but also from the children, because children learn how to treat children based on how teachers treat them. So we want to be aware of that. We also need to talk about historical inequities. To understand why suspensions and expulsions exist, we have to understand how Black children have been excluded from the American educational system since slavery. From the time that Black people were enslaved, learning was banned. They prohibited, through law, the teaching of reading and writing and math, not only to the enslaved, but also to those who were freed. So Black children still, to this day, have little access to high quality programs, which is very sad because when you think about the three longitudinal studies that gave us the data that proves the effectiveness of a high quality early childhood program, the number one, the Perry Preschool Project, 100% of the participants were Black. The Chicago Child Study, 97% of the participants were Black. And the Abecedarian, 93% of the participants were Black. So we used the data from these Black children to prove the benefits of a high quality program, yet we pushed them out of those programs. If they're lucky enough to access them, we push them out through the back doors through suspensions and expulsions. So what we know is that Black children are still victimized by racist policies that were never, ever designed for their participation nor their success. And the same is true for children with disabilities. Children with disabilities were totally excluded from school. My mother, born in 1940, had a physical disability, and they wanted my grandmother to put her in an institution. Cognitively, she was fine. My grandmother fought and fought and fought for my mother to go to the neighborhood school, and she was the first in California to ever do so. But we know that there are systemic barriers to inclusion, and it includes ableism. Back in those days, they did not want to see children who looked differently. I do want to say that the way that disabilities are addressed today was a parent movement. Families pushed for laws to change. So some of the other barriers are perceived financial barriers, barriers in policy, Lack of workforce preparation. Many teachers feel that they're not prepared to address the needs of children with disabilities. And we know that services are uncoordinated, and there's really a lack of commitment to really serving children with disabilities. And this is influenced by attitudes and beliefs. Many teachers feel that they're not prepared. Children need to be in isolated classrooms, and that they'd rather not have children with disabilities included. Ableism includes attitudes and beliefs that are held by policies, by administrators and other decision makers, and that's been the primary barrier to truly engaging in inclusion. We've had, since parts B and C were put in effect, we've only seen a 5% increase in inclusionary practices. So again, there are some inequities in our early childhood special ed programs. And then another area of inequities is the workforce and how the workforce is compensated. We know that we are paid very, very little. What you may not know is the inequities that began very early in the early child care system, because child care really began with enslavement, when enslaved women were forced to care for white children. After the Civil War, they were still forced to care for white children. And this was the beginning of the devaluation of early childhood services for centuries that we're still influenced by today. Today's workforce, we know that the majority of them are women. And unlike K-12, where 80% of the workforce are white women, 40% of women of color comprise today's workforce. So 60% are white women. We know that Black and Hispanic educators are the lowest paid amongst all early childhood educators. We also know that they have a lack of opportunities and access to the same level of education and professional development supports as their white peers. So not only are they the lowest paid, but they usually cannot access professional development. We know that Hispanic workers are usually in the infant and toddler rooms. Listen to this, regardless of education levels. African American and Hispanic workers are relegated to those low-level positions, and the African American workforce, they're paid 78 cents less per hour than their white peers. So again, this tells us that there is a problem in terms of equity. And I'm just going to say it. There's not an executive order that can be written that will erase inequities or inequitable practices. The burden of that is really on us. So, in what ways does the early childhood program promote inequities, this power and this domination? I've said this before, but unfortunately, and in many ways, we teach children to be racist and biased. I know that's a shocker. I know it is, because we come to this field because we love children and we want to positively influence their outcomes. So you may be wondering, Rosemarie, what are you talking about? How can that happen? Listen, and some of you may have seen my TED Talk. I was visiting a classroom, and this little guy named Raphael and two of his white friends were supposed to be cleaning up, yet they were at the water table splashing around. And the teacher said, Raphael, did you hear the cleanup song? Raphael, why are you still playing? Raphael, do you want to be in trouble? I was curious as to why she continued to call Raphael's name, yet she ignored his white peers. How is that teaching children to be racist? First, you're teaching privilege to his white peers. They know they're all playing, but they're learning very early at 3 and 4 that I can do things that Raphael can't. And that carries on throughout the lives of these children. And then the teacher is teaching all the other children that people who look like Raphael get in trouble more. His name is called more, they get in trouble more. And then when Raphael gets suspended, they learn that people who look like Raphael are dispensable. They can be put out. They're not as valued as the other children. And these sentiments are passed down from the teacher to the child. And we have to be aware of that. And we have to be aware of the power that goes on, the power dynamics in that classroom. I have a friend who's a teacher, and a little girl was just really being mean to one of the little Black boys, just mean. And she said, "Why are you being so mean to Dwayne?" And she goes, "Well, why do you care? You don't like him either." You think children don't see it? They see who we interact with, who we value, and who we do not. The other thing we do is we inhibit a diverse workforce. What does that mean? We've already seen some of the data about the workforce. But listen to what happens. A child is born. They're put in a child care facility. The first person they are introduced to is usually the white director, the white assistant director. And it's not until they get to the infant room that they see a person of color, usually Black or Hispanic. And that person of color is responsible for feeding them and changing their diapers and doing all the other wonderful things that infant and toddler teachers do. Then that child is three to five. They go to their preschool classroom. The director is still white. The assistant director is still white. You know that the higher up you get in our field, the whiter it gets. So they're white, they go to their preschool classrooms, and they see people of color. They go to a K-12 program. They're greeted by white principals, usually, white teachers, Black front office staff, or Hispanic, who gives them a tardy slip and takes care of their needs. Black or Hispanic janitors, Black or Hispanic cafeteria workers, Black or Hispanic bus drivers. So, what does this tell children? It says that people of color are there to serve you and to meet your needs. So, here I am, a college professor. Do you know that I am usually the first Black teacher my students have ever had? And I was the state administrator for Colorado, which meant that I was in charge of everything for children. And someone once asked, "Rosemarie, what is the biggest challenge you face as a leader?" Can I be honest with you all? Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes. The biggest challenge I face as a leader is white women. Not because they're vicious or malicious or any of that, but because they've had no practice taking leadership, guidance, or oversight by a Black person. So I'm challenged all the time. Because again, for many white women, I am their first boss, if you will, of color. And in some ways, it's like, how do you get to tell me what to do? Especially if you've only known a Black person to be your bus driver, to be your janitor, to be your food service worker. That could be a natural reaction. So when we talk about how to use equity to dismantle, disrupt inequities, it's changing the early childhood workforce and how we treat children. Because if we don't, we will continue to see the inequities being promoted at the youngest ages in our field. So, what we have to do is promote a more diverse workforce. I have people who have come to me totally committed to diversity. And I go to their schools and I see most all white leaders and most all people doing the grunt work as people of color. I actually conducted an equity audit on one of the facilities back east. And this principal was so dedicated. And they asked, Rosemarie, why is it that I can't find qualified people of color to work for me? And people say they're always in trouble when I give that little smile that I just caught myself doing. So I smiled and I said, well, let's take a look. Let's audit your staff files because they had free tuition for their employees. We took about a week auditing staff files. Do you know that about 65% of his aides, his people of color, had master's degrees? Mhm. And they earned the master's degrees while they were employed. This person almost cried. They said, how did I miss this? How did they miss it? Because of bias. That person came in as an aide or a para of color. They were put in that box and never allowed to leave it. I have to say that was about 10 years ago, and his staff is so diverse right now because not only did he make the commitment to change, but he engaged in the policies and the practices and did what's necessary to change. Now, I want to say that this isn't favoritism. It isn't hiring the less qualified person. It is about hiring the best qualified person without engaging in that lens of racism and bias. So I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. I'm so excited because I have finished this on time, girl. Miss Denisha. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over.
You did so great. I was watching the clock. I was ready to like drop a hint if I needed to, but you were perfect, right on time. Thank you so much for that fantastic keynote on equity to get us going. There's so much that you mentioned that I want to come back to, but I think one of my favorites I wrote down is outcome is justice. I love that. We need to say that more and more. But we've got so many people to hear from, so stick around because you are a panelist as well too. But now we're going to turn to our other panelists, and I've asked each one of them to kind of start with their own brief remarks about equity. So first, we have our DEY co-founder and president of the board, Dr. Nancy Carlson Page. Nancy is professor emerita at Lesley University, where she was a teacher educator in child development for more than 30 years. Nancy has written many books and articles on children's play, their social and emotional development, and the effects of media and technology on young children. She is a critic of current education reforms that promote standardized tests and the privatization of schools. You can read more about Nancy on our Institute webpage and read many of her op-eds as well on our op-ed page. But please join me in welcoming our fearless leader, Nancy Carlson Page.
Oh, thank you, Denisha. And thank you, Rosemarie. I really appreciated your talk. It's very thought-provoking. I appreciated the range of aspects of inequity that you touched on, and it's a lot of dots to connect when we hear a talk like yours, and I really appreciate it. I look forward to this next amount of time when we can dig deeper into a lot of the issues that you raised. Thank you so much. And I'm honored to be on this panel with you, Rosemarie, and Peter and Jennifer, because they too have a lot of experience in dealing with racial inequity, economic inequality, a lot of the struggles that we have in the early childhood field that uh, prevent justice, inhibit justice. So, we founded Defending the Early Years 10 years ago. And when we founded it, we understood that that the education system in the United States is fundamentally inequitable. And it's more inequitable in early childhood than any other level of education. If we had, a guaranteed, accessible, affordable, quality, just education system for children from preschool or better yet, birth on, then we would be having a different conversation. But we don't have that. And what we we have a system that's so inequitable that it's families that have resources can pay for very high quality private preschools. But kids who don't have those resources may have nothing or may have a preschool that's not nearly as thriving and full of opportunity as those kids who get to go to the private schools. So it's and then we understood too that things were changing in the field of early childhood because of the education reform movement and No Child, sort of starting with No Child Left Behind and then ramping up under Obama with Race to the Top. We saw this increase of testing, increase of data and accountability, and a push down of academic skills and expectations into early childhood, which for us was utterly alarming. And then the research was showing that it was in low-income communities of color that this stuff was having the biggest impact. That's where play was disappearing the most. That's where child choice was disappearing. That's where there was more teacher-directed instruction and more workbooks and less music and less arts and less agency, less child agency. So, we kind of tried to organize around this. We also saw at the same time an increase in school suspensions, and I'm really glad Rosemary talked about this. I was at the time reading the Office of Civil Rights reports annually. One year during this period, there were, this is similar, but these numbers were increasing during this very conservative period, which we still have in education, but there were 8,000 preschoolers suspended that year. And when I read the report, just like Rosemary says, it was mostly Black boys who were suspended. And why? And we started asking ourselves, okay, this is all, making a picture of profound inequality and lack of access and injustice in the early childhood field. And so, we put ourselves together to try to define a mission, which is pretty lofty, but it is our mission is to try to provide high quality, accessible, affordable, early childhood, developmentally appropriate education that's just and equitable for every child in the country. And this seminar is part of that. This institute is part of that. And everyone here is helping us move. It's baby steps going in that direction, but we've been at it for 10 years and hopefully everyone can share this mission with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much. Yes, the work of defending the early years has always been about this issue of equity. So thank you so much. I shared a link in the chat. I'm so proud of this. When I first joined the organization, Diane Levin, their co-founder, reached out to me and she's like, Tanisha, let's write something together. And we wrote our article for Ed Week on preschool suspensions and the harms that they cause. So I just shared that link there. Awesome. Great. So our next panelist is Jennifer Keys-Adair. So Dr. Jennifer Keys-Adair is a professor of early childhood education and director of dynamic innovation for young children at the University of Texas at Austin. A trained cultural anthropologist and former preschool teacher, Dr. Adair works to understand the impact of racism and white supremacy on the early schooling experiences of young children. Dr. Adair is the author, along with co-author Dr. Kayomi Sanchez Suzuki Colgrove, of the book Segregation by Experience, Agency, Racism, and Early Learning, published in 2021 by the University of Chicago Press. Still one of the books that I highly recommend to everyone and which we selected for our first DEY book study. So we were still learning from it. We're still using it. So please join me in welcoming back Dr. Jennifer Keys-Adair, who's going to share some opening remarks.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Tanisha, so much for welcoming me back and to the whole DEY staff. You all are incredible and so dedicated, and it's a real honor for me to be here. Rosemary, your talk was powerful, and I think that one of the things that I started writing down and really got me thinking a lot was this idea of how people always, that similar sensibility of it's not just always about race. and your statement that maybe it's not only about race, but it's always about race all the time. I have found that over and over in my work. So I study the ways that racism and white supremacy impacts children's experiences at school. And one of the biggest findings that we've had across many, many, many empirical studies is that race impacts how much agency you will, as an adult, support in a child. And this sometimes, unfortunately, the race of the teacher may or may not matter. It does matter, but when it comes to agency, I feel like teachers themselves don't have a lot of agency either. And so as we're talking about agency or thinking about how we work towards equity, supporting the agency of the child and supporting the agency of each other as educators is going to be really important. There is no development without agency, collective and individual. And so that the importance of agency, I think, is even more critical now, considering that the tool of the current administration is dehumanization across the board, and dehumanization equates to control. There is a constant pressure and mechanism to control children, to control women, control anyone who was not born here or doesn't speak English only. This mechanism of control is powerful, but it can be resisted. It has been before many times, and it can be done again. But I feel like with educators, I think sometimes we forget our own agency, our own sense of self, not self like an individual self, but a community self, that we are working on these issues together, and that is how we will make progress. So if the goal is dehumanization, the ultimate sense of humanity is to be able to influence and make decisions about your life in ways that are meaningful to you and to your community and to your families. So being able to stay steady in that commitment, I think, is something that we can cling to and be steady about, even as things are crazy town everywhere. The last thing I'd say is that Rosemary's talks also made me think about how much of our standards, connecting to what Nancy just said, but how much of our standards, assessments, our theories of early childhood and child development are built on white male perspectives of how children learn and grow. Some of them even based on the observations of their own children that we take as fundamental truths in early childhood and child development. I think expanding foundationally who we look to for an understanding of children's development needs to broaden. We need to dismiss racist studies, and I've written about this, but there are multiple racist studies out there that still continue to circulate everywhere in early childhood. We need to get rid of those and really be able to support the agency of ourselves and also the children that we have the privilege of being with. So I'll stop there for now. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That's, yes, agent. I don't know. I guess, yeah, I think it was your book that made me, I'm like all about agency. That's all I talk. And everyone's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, look, just read it. You got to understand it. It's so important, right? And I think it just ties in well to everything that we're going to continue to hear about, because it's super important. All right. And our final panelist today is Peter Rowich. Peter Rowich retired 5 years ago after 42 years of teaching in public schools. He taught first grade in upstate New York for 38 years. He has a BS in education from Wheelock College in early childhood, and an MS in education from Lesley College in an integrated arts and education. He became a national board certified teacher in early childhood in 2013. 4 years ago, Peter co-founded Love Our Children North Carolina. As lead advocate, he's working on ending exclusionary discipline for 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds in every county in North Carolina. He serves on the board of pastors for North Carolina Children and is a national advisor for defending the early years. Please join me in welcoming back Peter Rowich for his opening remarks. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Denisha. Thank you so much. white privilege, racism, and inequitable schools have been part of New Hanover County's history for generations. And New Hanover County is in North Carolina. So I helped start Love Our Children North Carolina in March of 2021 to disrupt those systems. And as Rosemarie noted, it continues to this day. So our 4 years of advocacy, including showing up and speaking and sometimes singing at every school board meeting for 50 consecutive months, has produced some positive changes in our school board policies. 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds are no longer kicked out of school for minor offenses, and the use of seclusion rooms has ended. So now, in our 5th year, we're advocating for the end of out-of-school suspensions for serious offenses of our youngest learners. And we've also created an online resource to help the other 114 counties in our state get started with ending exclusionary discipline in their schools. The resource has a very long name. It's Know Your Local Board of Education and Their Exclusionary Discipline Policies, North Carolina edition. And even if you don't live in North Carolina, our hope is that our resource will serve as a template for other education justice advocates and play warriors and early childhood educators all across the country. So organize, show up, speak up, and of course, vote. Equity is keeping all of our children in school where we can provide the support and help that they need to learn and thrive. Thank you, Denisha.
There we go. Thank you, Peter, and thanks for your amazing work in North Carolina. And please say hello to your co-founder, to me. She's also a lovely woman doing this work with you there. So great. So everyone, thank you so much for getting this started. I think we're going to have so much to discuss. I'm trying to, how do we frame it all, right? I wanted to first talk about, make sure that we clearly articulate how equity is under attack in the US, right? Because some people might be saying, well, what the heck does that have to do with early childhood, right? And again, we're talking about applying early childhood values to global challenges, right? So what are the challenges, right? Control, domination, right? Power, right? How those threaten us, the dehumanization that Jennifer mentioned. So just a few of the things that I heard, right? But from Rosemarie to now, we talked about inequities in suspensions, suspension discipline. I'm just started listening to the new book by Eve Ewing, Original Sin, and she, one of the things she talks about is punitive and discipline. Like, it's just one of the ways that schools exert control over children of color, right? And this idea of it controlling their body. So I think that's going to show up, right, in conversations about equity. We also heard about workforce compensation, right? And I think that ties into, because when we talk about suspensions, right, when I shared the link to the article I wrote, a lot of the comments Diane and I got from that article were from teachers. Because when you say stop suspending children, teachers take this a little personally, because where do suspensions begin? They begin in the classroom. And I was a kindergarten teacher who had three kids break into a fight. They were stabbing each other with pencils. And I called for help immediately and sent 2 boys to the principal's office, dealt with the injured child, went back to get my 2 boys from the principal's office, and was told that they were suspended. I said, what do you mean they were suspended? I had no idea that that was even possible. We're talking kindergarten 5-year-olds. And I found out after the fact. So what did I learn? Never, ever send them to the principal's office again, right? They were suspended. 2 Black 5-year-old boys in my preschool class in Washington, D.C. were suspended because I took an action to remove them from the room because, first year teacher needing help, right? So teachers play a role in this. So teachers, when they hear suspensions, they get defensive. And so, but that's part of the inequity, that teachers aren't fairly compensated and they're not also fairly given the skills that they need, not to turn kids to the principal's office, but to handle challenging behaviors in the classroom, right? And so that's part of the inequity. If we're not preparing teachers, if we're only telling teachers, hey, you can't handle them, let's suspend them, right? That's how we get to this place where suspensions in preschools are growing, because it's the only avenue we often give teachers, or we don't give them other ways to think about that. So I wanted to just mention how those are connected. We talked about workforce compensation. I mentioned that. And just the history of inequities in who cares for children as well. We talked about agency and the lack thereof for both teachers and children, and how that's super important. And again, back to discipline. So are there any other areas, about any other examples of how equity is under attack in the US that you think people should hear about and we should know about? Because I think we just want to start by centering that in the conversation. Does anyone, I can start with someone. I don't know if anyone's burning to go first. Peter, go off mute and you can start. There you go.
Well, as you can imagine, the list is long, but let me give you the top 2 attacks for me. One has to do the attack on the separation of church and state. And that has to do with the power and bankrolling of Christian nationalism. You may have seen in the news in the past few days how last Friday, the federal appellate judges ruled that the Louisiana law requiring that the 10 Commandments be posted in every classroom was determined to be unconstitutional. And just this past Saturday, the Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed into law showing, having the 10 Commandments appear in elementary and secondary schools. So clearly the inequity there is that all other faiths, or people who don't have a faith, are considered unimportant, are no longer actually being considered. So that's a concern. About bringing religion in. The other one I wanted to mention has to do with book banning. And that's something that's happening here in New Hanover County. Last year, or the 2023-24 school year, PEN America counted more than 10,000 book bans in the USA. And in our legislature right now in North Carolina, there's a House bill entitled Promoting Wholeness Content for Students. And so it's banning books with depictions of pervasively vulgar acts. It's horrible. It's just horrible that the rights are being taken away from parents to decide what it is their children should have access to. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, those are very good points. Nancy.
Yeah, this is related to what Peter's saying, the second point. And it's related to what I said in the beginning. And Rosemarie's presentation, thank you again, was very comprehensive about how inequity shows up in so many ways. One important one is curriculum, and actually how the classroom is structured. Or Jennifer's use of agency. How much opportunity do children have? How empowered do they feel to learn, to make choices about what they're interested in, to pursue things that they're interested in? So the more restrictive curriculum is, and that's a curriculum that's getting much more imposed on lower income families, the less agency kids feel, and the less sense of pride and sense of knowing oneself as a learner. There's a new wave of this kind of control of curriculum that's happening across the country, and now Trump has got both feet in it. And it is called the science of reading. I don't know if you know what it is, but it's an approach to reading that's been dictated by about 45 legislatures in the country. Legislatures shouldn't be dictating curriculum anyway. That's a whole other topic. But it is, I've studied it a lot. I actually think I know a lot about the science of reading and how it started. it is really an authoritarian approach to reading, and it's goes hand in hand with book banning because it's not allowing any stories in the classroom. A lot of books that are taken out of classroom under the guise of this isn't how to teach reading. It's a very didactic and controlled and top-down way of teaching skills. If you look up videos on it, I think you'd be horrified to see a lot of kids of color sitting there with a teacher and they're parroting back rules that they don't even know what they mean. And I'm looking at these kids thinking, how could they possibly grow to love to read when they're being drilled on didactic rules about reading that don't even have anything to do with reading? But if you look at who's behind Science of Reading, it's Moms for Liberty, a lot of conservative groups, and very conservative groups in education. And I think it's a new version of control over the population and perpetuating racism.
Absolutely. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Peter and Nancy. When I think about what's really being promoted today, of course, the discipline piece. And I don't know if you all have read the latest executive order on discipline, this common sense discipline approach without regard to race. We're going to see suspensions and expulsions skyrocket again because it's always about race. And then I love, Jennifer, what you said about agency and how we deploy these militaristic tactics with children of color. And we do it in early childhood programs across the board. There's one of my colleagues, Sobia Khan, on right now, and she really engages in a lot of professional development around engaging with children. But as a professor in the school, teacher education, we are teaching our students no more lines. Stop it. We don't even know why we have children standing in line. No more crisscross applesauce. No more 1, 2, 3 eyes on me. Stop policing children's bodies. And most of our workforce don't even know why they do it. But we know that they do it more with children of color. And we go back historically to believing that Black and Brown children are pathological, they're out of control, they need to be controlled, that whole science of reading as well. The other attack is funding. People were so shocked when they were threatening to defund Head Start. Will you please download Project 2025
Yeah.
and read it? It says right there, eliminate Head Start, defund childcare, and take that funding and funnel it to families. On the surface, that sounds great, but what does that mean? It means that they're pushing against childcare. They are encouraging families, mothers, to stay at home with their children, and we will fund you to do that. So funding, and then one of the most critical for me, being a Black woman, is erasure. And that comes through the banning of books that Peter talked about. Nancy, it comes with science of reading, getting rid of stories, lack of agency that Jennifer talked about, erasing the history that has gone into America. And part of that, too, is the whole eugenics piece. When you talk about science of reading and curriculum, my son last month graduated from law school, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Wisconsin and Oregon does not require you to pass a bar exam to practice. They have recognized, and I know you have a law background, Anisha, they have recognized that bar exams were created to keep Black people from being lawyers. That whole eugenics movement and high stakes testing, but that's also what we're doing with standards and testing today.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're under attack at every level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Jennifer, you want to go ahead, please? Yeah.
I was just going to add, thanks, Rosemary and Nancy and Peter. I just thought maybe I could add a thought about both another way in which equity is being attacked, but also a source of hope and promise, which to me seems to be in the kind of antithesis of control and dehumanization is often local cultural resources and the ability for things to look and be different depending on where you are, who's there, and being able to be nuanced and responsive to the cultural groups that you are serving. And so sometimes in this like effort to standardize everything, there's a certain way that everything is supposed to look and to be. But I think what this attack is to make everything look the same for non-wealthy white individuals, and white wealthy individuals are going to have a very different type of educational experiences, and it is going to be like blatantly two-tiered unless communities fight for local, responsive, connected to families kinds of experiences. And I'm sure many of you, because you're here, work actively with families to welcome them and help them to know that they're welcome, that they're safe where you are. I know that's being attacked, and immigrant families are being scared away from schools, from early childhood programs. They're scared their names will become subject to government knowledge. There's a lot of fear on purpose around early childhood and immigrant families. But that is a source also of community and stability and being able to work together and deciding together what is the best way to go about strategically making sure that kids can feel safe and can be at school, and that families can feel comfortable going to work knowing their children are safe. So I think that loss of control is like that push to make everything the same reveals how powerful it is when we work with local communities and we are working with our families and welcoming them and helping them to feel safe in our spaces.
Jennifer, I'm so glad you brought up families. Thank you so much. Patty Kekison, who's also on, she is over the National Family Leadership, FLTI, Family Leadership Training Institute, because our families right now living in fear, not knowing what to believe, not knowing what to do. I think it's going to be critical that family engagement, true engagement, coupled with involvement is going to be critical. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, that's a good point. We hear from a lot of families, right? They feel the pressure. They feel the pressure that they're being told, their young child's not going to do well if, if they don't get this or that. And so they are under pressure. And then if they're under pressure, then the child, that pressure might shift to the child, right? And so we have to really think about supporting the families, right? In that sense, right? As part of the equity piece, because if they don't feel supported, if they don't feel valued, right, then they're going to struggle, right? To struggle in providing that care to their children. So that was great. You guys mentioned so many different ways. I hadn't read about this new executive order. I wrote an article for a journal issue that we were doing on the current times and how teachers are responding, and I had to like read 5 or 6 of those executive orders, and I just can't bring myself to read another one because they are so tough. But I will say that piece, that punitive control, is very, very important to the dehumanization, right, that Jennifer mentioned, what's happening. And I remember there was a documentary, I can't think of the name, but I think you all recall, I think it was in, I want to say McKinley High School, was that North Carolina or Texas, where the young girl was like body slammed out of her desk chair. It was like a really violent attack by a police officer. There was a documentary that came out about it. And so they interviewed lots of different people. And the language that the people who are pro this discipline use, you can hear how an executive order like that will be, right? It's like the zero tolerance for any type of difference in behavior, right? Looking at a teacher wrong can get you in so much trouble, right? Just carrying yourself in a way that somebody doesn't like, right? It's just this, but it's, to Jennifer's point, it's the pursuit of this sameness, right? That if we accept people as different and accept different ways of being and different styles of dress and clothing and speech, then we're losing control, right? And so that kind of stems from that need to control. And so what does that lead to? Surveillance of young children, policing of their bodies, policing of their minds, right? And so that's all very connected. And I think, and then we get to the other, right, like the pushing the other side of the view, right? The 10 Commandments and the things like that are attacking and eroding really parts of the democracy that we needed to uphold in our education, right? And so that's being challenged. So thank you for that. So our next question is really just thinking about, I want you to think about in your work, right? Because we all do such different work, community advocacy, teacher education, research, right? We do a lot of different things, but how how does a commitment to equity support your work, right? And how can we use it to support our mission, right, at DEY? And so I think because I don't want equity to be lost as a buzzword, right? People talk about equity, 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 but then when equity is being threatened, when diversity, equity, inclusion are being told are illegal, right? People just walk away. Well, don't just mention equity, right? And we can't do that. We can't abandon our commitment to equity. So how can we use this commitment to equity to support all of our work, right? To ensure that children have a just and equitable early childhood education. Who'd like to start with this one? I can give you guys a few minutes. I see your
Well,
brains
I don't,
swirling and thinking.
this may not be the answer you're looking for.
Oh, it's okay.
Um, this idea that we're talking about of punitive discipline, that is one of the areas that I'm very interested in. And especially as a teacher educator, trying to offer teachers a true understanding of how to approach issues of discipline in in a different way, in a way that's actually empowering to children and where they feel like you're an ally and you're working with them. You're not using your authority over them, you're not punishing them, and so forth. So I'm just going to tell you a short story out of my experience that might demonstrate what I'm trying to say. I was working in the Boston Public Schools for a couple of years, helping teachers in kindergarten and first grade. There was a kindergarten teacher who was having difficulty with one little girl who was coming into school very angry and aggressive every morning. Her name was Kayla. She was a little girl of color. She would walk in, and when I was in the class, I could see that she had, she brought her upset, her trauma and her anger from home, which I was only told she came from a really low income family and that they had a lot of problems. That's all I knew. But she came in looking troubled. So one morning, and the teacher asked me to help. I'd been in the classroom. The teacher asked me to help what to do because she was hitting kids and acting violently in the classroom. He didn't know what to do. So one morning I was there, she came in. One of the things, their morning ritual was they had a piece of paper with all the kids' names on it, and kids would come in, get a pencil, and either check off their name or make a little picture or somehow indicate in a little box that they were there. So I'm at a table, Kayla comes in, there's a little boy, Anthony. He comes in, he takes a pencil, he starts to write, and she's there. It's just early morning with that, upset look. And she grabs the pencil from him and she shoves it in his stomach. So what am I going to do? I'm the only adult there. And I think probably for most of us, a knee-jerk response is punitive, is you get a timeout, or you shouldn't do it, or that's wrong to do, or if you do it again, you're suspended, or you go to the principal's office. And I was the only one there, so I took the pencil and I said, Kayla, look. Anthony was fine, by the way, made sure of that. Kayla, look. And I took the pencil, I pushed it into my stomach, and I said, ow, ow, that hurts. It really hurts when that pencil goes into your stomach. And it hurt Anthony because the pencil went into him. That's all that was said. The kids went off to choice time. And later in the morning, the teacher came over to me with a painting that Kayla had done. She had painted different colors of concentric circles, and she dictated to the teacher, this morning, I poked Anthony in the stomach with a pencil. Then I felt bad. And I thought that is just what I want. Because we have an administration right now that's hurting a lot of people, and everyone's a sociopath, and they couldn't care less who they're hurting. But when you hurt people, you should care about it. And from a developmental point of view, because children learn experientially and through concrete experience, I didn't tell her what to do. I didn't tell her it isn't right to do that. I showed her. And it affected her because she painted it later in a totally other part of the room I didn't even know about. So one of the point I'm trying to make is that I don't think we have filled out enough understanding in the field of how to do discipline from a developmentally appropriate way that's enabling and where kids feel like we're on their side. We're not using power over them, we're using power with them. And we're trying to help them, enable them to be better humans and kinder and understand more what it feels like to be in a human community. And I know we have tons of PD we need to do around race and culture. I'm committed to it completely, but I don't think we do enough on this way of working with kids on discipline that isn't punitive.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's because we don't know, like you said, we don't have another. It's like I did. We used to use this thing in a training we did from on social emotional development. It's like if a child can't tie their shoe, what do you do? If a child can't wash their hand, what do you do? If a child then if a child can't behave, what do you do? Right? Because you don't punish a child who doesn't know how to tie their shoes. You don't punish a child who doesn't know how to wash their hands. You don't punish a child who doesn't know how to cut straight. You teach, you show, you demonstrate. But if a child doesn't behave right, our first instinct is to punish, right? So we have to change that instinct because what does punishment do? It doesn't build empathy. Had you put her on timeout, I don't think she would have made that painting. I don't think she would have felt bad, right? You don't learn empathy from punishment, right? From that type of discipline, right? And that should be the goal, right? So yeah, I'd love to hear from everyone else your thoughts on
Well,
how you use equity. Yeah.
and what you said is so important. So where is it learned? Because
Right.
and I think another layer of this is really helping teachers to identify where their pain is coming from. We have all been traumatized. We expect teachers to pour from this cup that's usually empty.
Mm.
Encouraging them to really talk about what it is they value, because it's hard to change hearts. We have to change hearts. We have to look at how we were raised, how children were treated, those cultural disconnects, because even when you ban suspensions, they find another way to punish.
Mm.
And sometimes I worry if you really don't like this kid and you want them out of your classroom and you can't get them out, what happens without support? So I think getting to the heart of the matter, what Nancy did, she showed that empathy. But what about a teacher who really believes children should be punished? And the other part are cultural disconnects. In my family, when an adult calls you, you say yes and you come. Yes, while you're running to be in their presence. I came here to Colorado, in Parker, Colorado, 98% white, a whole different culture, experience, and race than I've ever dealt with. And I called Connor. I said, Connor. He goes, what? Like,
Mhm.
I'm just like, no, he didn't. And I thought it was a mistake. And I said, Connor. He goes, what? And now I'm mad. Can I be honest about that? I'm just
Yeah.
gonna be, I was mad. I marched right over there because I couldn't believe this little 3-year-old is answering me what? Because in my culture it's so rude. So I went over there, I said, Connor, and he looked up and goes, teacher, you keep calling my name. What do you want? And I saw the confusion on his little face. He expected me to tell him what I wanted, and I expected him to come and see what I wanted. You see those cultural disconnects? So I think a lot of self-reflection about what pushes our buttons, how we get rid of this historical need to hurt children. I can't say it any other way because
Yeah.
Mhm.
suspensions and expulsions and corporal punishment and all of that, all of it goes hand in hand, and really provide what Nancy said, the professional development activities to help to change hearts and practices.
I'd like to share my experience here in North Carolina, but first, kudos to Nancy. What a powerful story. And Rosemary, everything you're saying is spot on. I wish Love Our Children had met you earlier. You would have helped or at least helped my learning curve in terms of knowing what's happening to our youngest learners. Our experience in North Carolina is when, even to this day, even though it's been over 4 years of advocacy, when a parent or someone in a store sees us wearing a Love Our Children shirt or a Love Our Children pin, they say, oh, what's that? And we do the elevator speech. And the reaction is always the same. They say, I didn't know we suspended 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds. And that to me speaks to the need about educating the public on a couple of levels. For early childhood, we need to educate the public in terms of what child development is and how to best support it. I think if more people understood what's going on, that might help people have more sympathy for the horrible pay that our most important educators have working while the brain is developing in the, in the first 3 to 5 years. I say along with that, I think it's just important to make sure, well, I should say, people ask, what it is, and I do find that the people then become supportive. You were asking, how do you get a commitment, Denisha? And I just want to go back to that. I think educating the people, and then in our case, bringing them to school board meetings and seeing what's going on has helped to get a commitment. I mean, Love Our Children has shown up, as I said, for 50 consecutive months. We started out with 2 speakers out of 20, and now we're up to 10 or 11 speakers. We dominate the board meetings, and you can imagine how happy the school board is. The bottom line really is that everyone we talk to has that empathy in terms of we should not be kicking our youngest learners out of school. We should be helping them. That's been my experience, except for 4 members of our school board. That's the amazing part, that there are 4 members of the school board who don't get it, but clearly need some education or need to see if their goal on the school board is to have power, to show them that helping the community can give you power too. And unfortunately, there's another inequity. These members of the school board are helping one segment of our population and not the whole community.
Yeah.
It may be that each of us and collectively will have to make decisions or commitments about what kinds of experiences we're going to offer young children, regardless of what's going on, and what kinds of experiences we're going to protect and stand up for. I think there's this, I think, at least in my experience working with teachers, even not just in the US, but around the world, there is these like multiple pressures that can feel so overwhelming that it feels like even if you want to do something and you believe in something, you're powerless. It feels, I know it can feel very overwhelming. People are saying that in the chat as well. I'm sure lots of people on our bad days feel that way. But there is this like, children are children, but our requirements of curriculum and what they're supposed to know has shot up. The amount of agency to determine creatively how we're going to go about this has gone down, and our tolerance for behavior, or our ability to handle a broad range of behaviors, has shrunk. Mm-hmm. In a sense that what was not misbehavior, just creative play, using your initiative, being excited about an idea, collaborative problem solving, can be categorized under these pressures as misbehavior, when in reality, it's not really misbehavior, but in the context of so much pressure and stress, and both internally and externally, these just natural kind of child behaviors can be easily categorized as problematic. We have this like by great I mean terrible, emerging body of literature about problem children and problem behaviors. It's trash. It's terrible. Can you see I don't know if you can tell my face. White people always give away their feelings because of their red face, but like my red face this just makes me so angry. Because context determines how we label children, not the children themselves. The labels say something about power. They don't say anything about the children themselves. Mm-hmm. And so I think part of, at least to understand why we're feeling this kind of stress and pressure, and why we may be harsher towards children, or feel like we're at the end of our rope and it's only 9:30 in the morning, there's a real reason why that's feeling that way. And sometimes when we understand why it's feeling that way, it can help us to recognize it and take a step back and realize, like, this isn't the kid, this is this giant thing that's making me feel like what's happening isn't sustainable or I don't like it. So I think sometimes just by supporting children's agency and letting them have a certain group of experiences in the classroom, that it broadens out what behavior is okay.
Yeah.
Like, if you want children to come up with ideas for projects that they want to do, then their excitement, jumping up and down, finding friends to work on them with it, suddenly isn't misbehavior, disrespectful, being off task. It's celebrated, it's valued. I think the trickiest part about this is that this is how racism comes to play, is because there are kids right now who do all of those things and are praised for it. And there's a lot of kids who are not. And those kids are going to compete forever. That's this whole, like, to me, that's where the tree that Rosemary's showing, like, that's how the tree is bending, because kids are having those critical thinking, leadership, like all of these experiences with rewards. And there's a lot of kids doing those same behaviors, and they're being disciplined, they're being reprimanded, they're being labeled, they're being marked. And there is no one can convince me that that's not a very racialized line between who gets to be rewarded and who's being punished for those same behaviors.
Yeah, that's very powerful. It made me think of, I know we were talking about teachers need a lot of tools, right? And sometimes you just have to set the parameters, right? So one of the programs I worked with called Hatch Partners in Play, it's in Pittsburgh, and they bring what they call Play Lab to public school classrooms. And so what is Play Lab? It's an hour or more protected time for play, for free play with loose parts with the children. And by protected, there are 2 rules for the educators. You cannot use Play Lab. You cannot deny kids Play Lab. Like, during the day, you can't be like, oh, you're not listening to me? No Play Lab later, right? It's not a tool. You can't take it away from them. And second, during Play Lab, you cannot remove a child from Play Lab either. You can pull them aside to redirect, of course, but that's it. They go back to Play Lab. Those 2 rules then force the 3 teachers to really rethink then what happens, right? Because if you can't take away Play Lab from children, then you can't engage in that punitive discipline, right? And so it forced them to rethink about that. And then during play, yes, they were, in the beginning, they were pulling them aside, they were redirecting a lot. By my 3rd observation, they weren't even doing that anymore. It was more like a look from across the classroom. Hey, and then they would go back to play, right? They didn't even, but it changed, right? So just creating a space where children's time is protected and you can't be punitive and you can't do these things forces then a change to your entire what you do. And they saw the benefits. They saw that this protected time changed the nature of the relationship the kids had with each other and with them in the classroom, right? And so there are ways I think that we can get there, but I think that's just one example. Take an hour a day where you're not going to engage in any type of punitive discipline with the children, and it forces you to come up with an alternative, right? To think.
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that, Denisha. And I just wanted to this kind of, there's a lot of people writing about SEL, and I have a lot of feelings about it. But there are a few people, Travis Wright, who does a lot of work with NEYC, as a professor at University of Wisconsin-Madison, Margaret Beal Spencer, who's been at University of Chicago for a long time. But the writing about resilience and trauma can be really helpful here to understanding as adults, our response to certain behaviors can come from our own traumatic experiences as children. I know I had a very tricky childhood, and there are some responses that I've had to really work on and understand when children do certain things. And when children do some types of behaviors that are quite alarming, often they can be responses to something we're triggering, but we didn't know that we were doing that. So there are a lot of ways, I think, that exist in the world but don't get enough recognition as being tools to help us as we try to think about broadening out this behavior. So I just wanted to add that to the incredible Play Lab program that you've been working with, Denisha, because I think these are all strategies that can work depending on your context. So just wanted to add that one.
Yeah, yeah, and there's lots of strategies. I'm seeing things in the chat. People are talking, which is great. Thank you for sharing the quote. Carly knew what quote I was trying to mention about, if a child misbehaves, she put it in there. It's perfect. But there's a lot of thoughts about it in there, and it's hard. I think what I'm hearing from a lot of the people saying, it's hard. You've got, and I can't imagine. Again, I was teaching kindergarten back in the early 2000s. I was a preschool director back in 2003, 2004. I mean, the kids are different. This is 20 some years later, right? Off of COVID, living in a whole different world, right? The kids are different. And I respect that. When people say, you don't know what it's like, you're right. I don't teach little kids every day right now. And I don't know how different their behaviors are. And I know that you're dealing with a lot of trauma in the classroom, a lot of kids who are not feeling seen or heard, and they're showing up and they're engaging in power dynamics and they're doing big things, right? And so it's a really challenge and it's really hard. And I think punitive discipline is just the easy out, right? And it makes teachers who don't have a lot of power feel empowered, right? I think we forget that adults, right, in our dehumanized capitalist world have no power. And so you're constantly trying to exert power from other people, children, right? And this happens in a lot of history, right? Dr. Stacy Patton, I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's an amazing, amazing Black woman historian looking at, I mean, her whole thing when I got involved in her work was about, stop it hitting children. Violence against children is so bad. And she still does that. But she's currently right now writing a book and she's posting about it on social media where she's tracing the history where how we treat children really came from, rooted in like old time European cultural values, which were the awful, awful, awful things people did to children for centuries, then got passed on through colonization to other countries. And like we're still dealing with the ramifications of that today, that it's generational, right? Generational. Yeah. Maybe we went from hitting children is not, thought of as okay like it used to be. But we're still the mindset that right children they not to be trusted, they're up to no good, right? I hear people tell me all the time, well, you don't know, he's just a bad kid, right? Like these beliefs that we get about children's nature when we know children are born without any of those things, right? So how do we get to this space where we're seeing children in this light, right? And it's definitely very it's definitely very like cultural. It comes from generations of abuse and trauma that we've all endured. I don't want to end on that note, right? So we're going to get ready to transition to Q&A. So if you have a question, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A. And then I see Peter and Nancy want to say something, and that might just bring us to Q&A. We might not have that last question, but I don't want to end on a bad note of generational trauma. So let's hear what you guys got to say.
Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Nancy. We haven't talked about zero tolerance or one size fits all. And one of our arguments in New Hanover County is our 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds are being punished and treated the same way that 14, 15, 16, and 17-year-olds are. In other words, the school board has a policy. It doesn't differentiate between our youngest learners and our oldest learners. And it even goes to the state legislature. The state legislature has statutes to deal with school discipline, and they don't differentiate either. So I think that's a big problem. The one size fits all would be whatever the punishment is, it's for everybody. And I think Jennifer sort of alluded to the fact of when she talked about trauma, that we don't know what's happening to kids. It just requires us to have these conversations with kids. It shouldn't be an automatic suspension if you get in a fight. It really should be, what's up? What happened?
Yeah.
One of the things that in defending the early years we really emphasize is child development. And understanding kids aren't adults. They don't see the world like adults do. They go through a long process of growing up and making sense of the world. And our job is to try to understand them and how they're seeing the world, and not to impose expectations that we think, first of all, that are ours. We haven't even sort of realized that we went through this process too and forgotten the whole thing. But you know, I think if even in the justice system we understood child development better, there's no way we would be putting kids, you know, in juvenile justice detention or punishing them as if they're adults when they're 13. If we understood better, like adolescent development is a phenomenally interesting field, but there's just so much that happens in human development up until full-blown adulthood that we need to be better schooled about. And the other thing is, a couple of you have alluded to sort of more inner work, inner awareness. And you know, when we had the Center for Peaceable Schools, I worked in at Lesley University for 10 years, and we did a lot of, we had an interracial team, and we did a lot of work on racial awareness. And I got so much more aware of how long it takes to go through a genuine process of understanding how you got conditioned in a society with systematic racism, and how it has affected each of us and how we perceive things. And we worked with teachers over time, like, how do I perceive the behavior of this child based on my own conditioning, my own cultural assumptions, which are part of my identity, but not necessarily allowing me to see the full person in front of me. And I think that self-reflection probably has to happen also with, I think, Rosemary, you alluded to, is helping teachers uh, come to terms with their own personal experience in how they were raised. What are their assumptions about human beings, about children, about how to treat them? These are really complicated values and messages that we're all carrying, and they affect how we see the world. And teacher education programs don't do any of this. At least ours didn't. Maybe they do now, and I wish they would, but I think it's really valuable to spend time on helping people work on the assumptions they're carrying about race, about humans, about behavior that are affecting how we perceive.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's so important. I think we see some of it, but not enough, right? We just don't see enough. And I think Jennifer was alluding to this, and I remember my first thought was I still believe number one way we can solve a lot of the school's problems, like cut the curriculum by 90%, right? We've got too much that we're putting on everyone's expected to do. At every grade level, there's just way too much to accomplish, which is not possible. It's not actually possible to systematically learn the entire third grade curriculum that's laid out, like to really know it in whatever we have 183 something days like that. It's just not possible, right? But we still put it out there, and it's still the goal. And then that sets up this system of failure where you're falling behind. Teachers are frazzled, and so any type of behavior, any type of anyone not being on task, it's not allowed, not accepted. You're not allowed to have a conversation that's not aligned, right, to everything. So that goes to, and so then the teacher education programs are the same way, because they're now being tasked to prepare teachers to do the impossible, and they're not able to do the things that they want to focus on a lot of times, right? Which is like getting in touch with all of this. So it's super important. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to start jumping into the Q&A because I got some questions from Zoe, and it's going right along with what we were talking about. Okay, scrolling up there, it's not going to happen. But I did see it. So there's questions about trauma, and so I wanted to start there. And so where is it? Okay. I'll come back to that one. Sorry. It was just sent to me, and now I'm trying to find it. Here we go. Okay. So, how do you support children that have lived through trauma, but also learn that the parent has experienced trauma? So, I had families refuse to seek any support or meet us halfway when it came to helping their child with emotional supports. Parent was so scared of their child being labeled. I feel like I was trying everything to help, but the family refused any support. Yeah, so that's one question. And I know that it comes up a lot. And I think that I see that a lot, especially and a lot of African American and Latino families where they're like, no, there's nothing wrong with him or her. We don't want that label because they know that special education can also be inequitable for Black children, right, in different ways. That label can follow them for years. They don't want them to be stigmatized. So they're less likely to kind of reach out and get that support if it means that it comes with an official label, right, an official diagnosis or a test or something like that. And a lot of the parents, that's their own trauma too. I think we forget that a lot of our kids with challenging behaviors or any type of, their parents also went through the same school that they did, and they probably did not have very good experiences. And so now they're parenting a child in a system that was not good to them. And that's going to come through, right? So they might be like, yeah, I don't, that didn't work for me, right? Those sorts of things, right? So any thoughts about how you might support families dealing with trauma who are untrusting of the system and probably with good reason?
I love what you just said, Denisha, because we are asking so many families to return to the scene of their own trauma. And it's tough. My son he had an IEP, and before he staffed out, before we went to that final meeting, my husband and I had to decide if he needed further services, if we would accept them or not. We decided as a family we would not. If he needed services for elementary school, we would decline them because we did not want him labeled as a Black boy. The door to special ed is wide for Black children. The exit door is very narrow. And fortunately, we were in a position where we could pay for services that were not connected to the school. So I want to say that so that people don't believe that people who decline services don't care about their children. So I want to dispel that myth. The other is this locus of control. You can only control what you can control. If you've ever had children and taken them to grandma's house, you ever notice how they lose their minds at grandma's? Everything goes at grandma's house. You could do whatever you want at grandma's house. And I know I'm generalizing, but just generally speaking. But when they get home, they remember the rules. Children are smart people. You can set up a trauma-informed environment that is really, really based on healing-centered practices in that classroom. We have to let go of this idea, oh, because they have trauma and the home is so bad and they live in poverty and all these things happen, I have no control. You set up a classroom that looks at a child, understands what trauma is, that can say, your behavior is sending a message. I'm going to find out what that message is. And within my power in this environment, we're going to meet those needs. There's a meme that goes around Facebook that says, if you knew the reason behind a child's misbehavior, you wouldn't get mad. It would break your heart. So we can fix only what we can fix. But what we can't afford to do is say, I can't do anything because of everything that's happening at home.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. You hear that a lot in people. I don't know, like the misuse of equity sometimes, or like their misuse of culture, like you're learning all this stuff about culture, but then they use it as an excuse not to do any. Well, but because it's his culture. Like, no, that wasn't why we were teaching you about culture for then you to then use it that way. But that tends to happen because people are young and inexperienced, and they don't know another way. They don't know how to take that information. So that's very powerful. Anyone else want to share thoughts about supporting families in this case with trauma?
I just think it's really hard. Go ahead, Jennifer. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that in my experience, what I have found teachers do really well that kind of get to this bringing children and families in rather than like doing the labeling and the disciplining is creating opportunities for children to do projects that they're interested in, even if it's a little bit each day, and that there are tangible things to send home to families for them to see, so that when you meet with families, when you talk to parents, you have something to engage in that's not discipline related or about the rules, that it's about what is interesting to their child. What do you appreciate about their child? And it doesn't have to be fake or pretend. Sometimes we really don't like certain kids, and then we kind of like fake this thing about what we quote like about them. But as we watch kids be sophisticated and use their agency and do projects, and we find out what they're interested in, suddenly lots of things open up to us as teachers to be able to connect with their families. Every parent, no matter if they're in a really messy situation, really dangerous situation, or a great situation, every parent wants to hear something nice about their kid, authentically nice. They want to know about their kid, what they're interested in. And sometimes they don't have any ability to tell you that. But I think when we open up our classrooms, then we have the opportunity to share with families these great things that their kids did. Otherwise, what I keep seeing around the country is this like public posting of literacy scores, math scores, where they are in testing. And I see this even in pre-K now, where your parents are seeing their children in terms of numbers really early. And so if there's a way that we can offer what they're interested in, what we see them gravitate towards, what they seem excited about, what they're really good at, from a real base of knowledge and expertise, that seems to open up those channels of communication without forcing them open.
Yeah.
That approach also, it builds trust in a really wonderful way with families. That is to say, you're noticing their child, you're seeing something amazing that they've done, you're sharing it with their parent. There's little that makes a parent as happy as hearing that their child had a wonderful time and did some amazing project, and that you see it. And the trust that impedes sometimes relationships with families and schools that have a history of oppression and mistreatment and inequality is totally understandable. And it's hard to figure out how to deal with it if you're the teacher. Do you want to talk about it directly? Is that possible? It's going to depend situationally, but I think that idea of actually sharing that same child is a really beautiful way to build trust. And the other thing I just wanted to say is classrooms that are play-based are the best opportunity we can give children for dealing with trauma in school. And it is pretty extraordinary to see, if you watch play carefully, how children will take that experience that's in their inner world and troubling, and they'll play it out through a story, through something they make up, through scenarios that are theirs. But their trauma is there through the story, and part of the purpose of play from a social emotional point of view is letting children work through the traumatic experiences they've had that only they know, only the kids know. What is it that happened to me that is something upsetting? That comes out in their play.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's anytime I see the erosion of play in a classroom, I worry for many reasons, but with increasing trauma in modern society today, that's one of the biggest impediments if we don't give kids those play opportunities every day.
Yeah, yeah. For someone who was sharing about, struggling with a lot of kids. You tell me you got kids off the wall behaviors, I'm gonna tell you they need more play. They need more play. They need more variety of play. Maybe more materials to play with. But they're running around. They're screaming. They're bored. Yeah, they're working through their trauma. It's all part of it, right? It's what their body needs, and enough time, and enough time, and more time, and more time, and you'll see a shift. You'll see them finally gain control over those emotions, over that experience, and they're able to move forward, right? But that play is how they get there.
Ultimately, they get control and feel like they resolved it. That's the perfect
Yeah,
thing that
yeah,
happens. If they had enough time, they actually work through it and it's resolved inside them.
yeah, yeah. And it could be delayed, right? I remember having to talk to a parent when I was a preschool director, and I said, well, so during dramatic play today, she kind of reenacted a scene that, she had an adult getting mad and thrown over a table. And she's like, oh, that happened 3 months ago when so-and-so just got back. And I said, well, it's showing up again, right, for her. And then in this moment, she needed to react that, she really took on of a yelling adult, and she threw the table over, and we all looked over like, wow, right? Like, what's happening? But that's how she was processing what had happened a few months ago, what she witnessed, right? And she needed that. And so it's super important to play. All right, the next question, I'm going to give it to you, Nancy, because you mentioned it, and there are people who are, what do you mean science of reading is problematic? So can you give them your quick elevator speech about science of reading and why it's not what people think it is?
Yeah, a lot of teachers have been seduced by this,
Mm-hmm,
and there's a whole boatload of propaganda out there about it. But
mm-hmm,
um, the science of reading movement has grown. It's really a political movement. There's no science. I spent all last summer searching for the science, and I read books all summer, and I went to see the governor of Massachusetts about it because I'm telling you, it's a house of cards. There is no science. There's little tiny pieces of neuroscience, but they certainly don't give us enough confidence about how reading should be taught. And all the neuroscientists will admit that. They have very little bit. The science they have is that if kids are learning phonics, there's a little light up going off in their brain. But they haven't done studies about all the other activities, like when they play or when they're told stories, is their brain lighting up? I mean, we haven't done enough research to be able to say that we can say how children should be taught reading. So this reporter slash journalist who doesn't know the literacy field at all went to conferences and judged them and made a podcast called Told a Story that was very difficult for me to listen to because it was so full of bias and misinformation and false information. And she attacked some very substantially grounded reading programs. There is no reading program that doesn't include phonics. So she set this up as a polarized situation where either you teach phonics or you don't. If these programs are bad because they didn't teach enough phonics or didn't teach phonics, there are no programs that don't teach phonics. It's how it's taught. But this woman, Emily Hanford, who had the podcast, got on a roll, and then media picked it up. Again, I have to repeat, she's not an educator. She doesn't have a science background. The whole movement is based on her podcast, and it's not informed. It's not informed. It's not accurate information. And then legislators picked it up because they love nothing better than one size fits all and one easy solution. Oh, forget poverty, forget dealing with race. Let's just teach all kids the same thing and get us off the hook, and it won't cost as much. And then the publishers love it because they get to make all new curriculum and get millions of dollars for mandating it across now almost all states. And then you've got this teacher directed drilling of kids in many cities, but the videos I see are kids of color who are just getting drilled on these facts, discrete little facts that aren't related to making meaning from print, which is the purpose of reading. So I don't know. Does that enough?
That's really good, right? That's perfect. I hopefully for the people who asked in there, I know, and I want to just acknowledge this that you said teachers are being seduced, and they are, because I've heard teachers say, first of all, they're feeling guilty. They're feeling like we do have an illiteracy problem in this country. I'm not going to pretend like we don't. We do have an illiteracy problem, and they feel like it's their
It
fault.
is not their
And
fault.
they feel like they don't know how to teach children to read. I've had students tell me, you didn't teach me how to. I'm like, there is not one thing that I can sit down and tell you that says do this and children learn to read. Children learn to read from being in rich literacy environments that stress multiple different things. Reading to children, printing, vocabulary, oral language. There are so many things that go into play. It really is like this idea that it's just teacher proof, that it's just if you do these 5 things, and so they feel like they're not being taught. And so they turn to science of reading because they want something so they can say, like, I'm not the one failing these children. Right. And
Yeah.
so I think we have to honor that. And again, pressures under teachers, right? Being scared, not knowing what they're doing, and having children graduate from their class and can't read, and then they feel some kind of way, right? And so again, the idea of science of reading is that we're taking one approach to teaching reading and mandating it for everybody. Instead of saying, why don't we take the 30-40% of the population who's not reading where they should be, and let's find ways to support them? Because we forget that 60 to 70% of the population learns to read just fine, right? So we're trying to address, there is a problem, but we're mandating one approach to that problem for everyone, and that's not going to work. The other thing I think we're doing is we're producing a generation of children who can read, but will never want to.
Yeah, that's already happening.
And that is I don't know anything more disappointing than a child who can read, a person, an adult human, tell me, I haven't read since college. And you find that exciting. You think that's like, people don't want to read because we've made it so laborious. We've made it such a chore. We've taken away all of the context that makes reading fun, right? To want to learn stories, to like delve into other worlds, that is being taken away because science of reading also comes with scripted curriculum. It comes with limited text, close reading. We're not going to have diverse stories and narratives and all of these things that get the imagination and get kids hooked. So that's the other thing I just want to add there. But that was perfect. But
Well,
it
it's
really, there is a lot of
understandable. It's understandable that teachers would like it because it takes the blame off of them. It gives them an easy answer, and I can understand how, if you will, seductive that is. But what we really need to do is help teachers learn how to observe children in depth, give them a wide ranging curriculum like Denise is describing. Watch how because kids learn to read in all different ways. There are some kids who never need one bit of phonics and they learn to read beautifully. And others need quite a bit of focus on it. So that we have to help teachers tool up to be able to see what is going to help X child master the print system in the best way possible for that person. And so there just isn't a one size fits all in education in anything. It doesn't exist. It would be nice because it would make the job easy. It's not an easy job. It's a really hard job, but it's not a teacher's fault that kids can't read. It's a huge systemic problem. And also it's overblown. It's not even the problem they say that has to do with how proficiency is described, and that's way beyond what is like your baseline average capability. So that's a whole other problem with how it's
we're being hoodwinked by what we call third grade proficiency, and what is that actually? Like, it's not what people think it is, right? That's definitely an issue. All right, we got another question. Jennifer, I'm going to give this one to you. So they say, what resources do you recommend to build understanding of the importance of agency, both children's agency and the adult educator's sense of agency and agency in the environment? So much of what is mentioned in this session, including the importance of agency, is critical, and we need to know so much more, yet it's not covered in teacher preparation. I'll stop there. There's a little bit more that they had, but I think you got the gist.
Well, thanks for that question. You should definitely read my book.
Yes.
How's that, Denisha?
Yes.
Plugging oneself doesn't always feel comfortable, but I think the other thing is there's young children, teaching young children, and a lot of practitioner journals. We've written about how to support children's agency in really practical ways. I think project-based learning, inquiry learning, there's lots of resources online. I always look to see what schools, what cities, what researchers are publishing this work. I usually tend to stay away from studies that are grounded in that have anything to do with like the word gap or any kind of like deficient or like deficit thinking about children and families. I don't think it is possible to support children's agency while having negative assumptions about children or their families. So anytime there is a program, an orientation, a framework, a set of practices that begin or includes deficit thinking about children and families, it's off the table for me. And I give that same advice to my students. There is a lot of really great work that I'm writing a new book. It'll be out in like 6 or 8 months. It's called Smart and Capable, 9 experiences that support children's agency. And these are kind of like the most common ways to support children's agency, and they can look really different. So I give examples from all over the world. I think sometimes we get stuck in having resources within the United States, but the United States is an amazing group of people from all over the place. And so sometimes we can look to other countries and other frameworks. Like, for example, in New Zealand, they have really the only functioning biliterate, bicultural early childhood curriculum in the world. And you can actually see how cultural practices are integrated into every part of the curriculum. There's frameworks in Australia, Finland, Brazil, Argentina, places where multilingualism and multiculturalism is a part of everyday life for children. And so there are a lot of resources outside the United States of where people can start thinking about how to broaden out how to better support children's agency. But in segregation by experience, there's lots and lots and lots of examples, historical and current. And then there's lots of stuff that I've written, but also a lot of people on our research team have written, where they just give examples of what teachers do to support agency with real concrete examples.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm noticing people are talking about the resources in the chat. Every link that we put in the chat will be emailed to you tomorrow morning when we send out that email with day 1 resources. So if you can't access them now, you will access them. If it's behind a paywall, we might have it up on our DEY page, so we'll send you that link as well too. So I just want to say that. There's a question here I want to shoot to you, Rosemary. What guidance can you give to a Black woman striving to thrive and lead in the early care and learning community profession? I don't know. We were talking about equity, so I think it's equitable that we address this woman's question.
I'm going to tell you what my grandmother would tell me. Do it
Okay.
boldly. Do it boldly. Walk in the room as if you own it. Do not come in as a guest or a visitor. You've paid your dues. You come in, speak the truth in love, exercise your agency, as Jennifer's been talking about, and do what you need to do. Apply for those jobs. And when you don't get it, ask for a follow-up meeting. Because first you get feedback, and you'll know if it's true feedback or not, but you also put people on notice that you are following up, that you expected this, and tell me why I didn't get it, so that next time I apply, I will. But the key is to be bold, is to show up in those unusual places. When I came to the state, I had an amazing white male boss who hired me. I knew nothing of state government, but I was a contractor. I made myself visible. I went to every meeting, every seminar. When finally I met with him before I knew the position was going to post, and I met with him before the posting. And what are you looking for? This is my resume, blah, 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 so that he would know me. The next week or so, I was presenting at a conference, and I told my husband, if I'm a serious contender, he'll show up, because he'd like to see how I present, and he did. He showed up, but just really being bold, really stepping out, being in every space possible, speaking your truth with love. I work with a lot of young people, and it's like, I'm not going to water down my message. Denisha, if it's okay, I'm going to go into that next messaging, one of the questions. Is that okay? Not watering down your message. We have to make sure that no matter what we're messaging, it's opening doors and not closing them. Right now, there's a lot of words, a lot of messaging that are causing our doors to be closed. I'm not saying water down the message, but let's go back to the outcome. Remember that outcome is justice? When they say you can't say equity, what do we really want? We want all children to be treated fairly. We want everyone to have opportunities. When you say we want to respect people's culture, because culture is one of those words, that we want everyone to be their authentic selves. Think about what it is you want and talk about that rather than that hot button word that might target you. So that goes into that question, how do we do this? We keep doing it because the work is there. The children show up every single day. Every day they show up, full of joy usually.
Yeah.
And we have to continue to do this equitable and social justice work. If we have to change a few words to keep it going, do that. But we have to focus on the outcome rather than the verbiage. That makes sense.
That does make sense. No, and
Rosemary,
another.
can I add also respectfully that those of us that are white and feel relatively safe in the world, particularly right now, can also take more risks, and we can be the people that speak out. We can share that burden. That burden shouldn't be the sole Black woman in the room.
Yeah.
This is our responsibility, our mess in a lot of ways, and I think it's important for us to take that responsibility seriously and put ourselves out there. And so just wanted to add that is a collective responsibility that we should be feeling. And if we don't, there's some great resources. You can email me and I'm happy to share some things that I share with my students and teachers, especially white teachers who are looking to really deepen their practice of standing up and sticking out. So just wanted to add that. Hopefully
Jennifer,
that's okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
I love that so much, and thank you. I came under attack. A woman attacked me in a big meeting, saying of course, angry Black woman, that I intimidated her and I yelled at her. I don't know if you could tell by my voice. I don't yell.
No,
It would hurt my throat. But a white woman in the room said, "Who are you talking about?" Rosemary. She was a very powerful woman in our group. And she said, "Oh, please, cut it out. Go sit down. That didn't happen." She didn't know how that changed my life.
I'm sorry.
When you're a victim of a microaggression, you're the least likely to be able to correct it without digging a deeper hole. So I really
And there are witnesses. There are usually witnesses.
And that's what I wanted to say. If you ever go up to someone after a meeting and say, "I really love what you said," you're doing it wrong. You said it after the meeting. White women are known for doing this. They tell you after the meeting they had your back. You need to say it in the meeting.
Yep.
You need to be clearly in the meeting and say, "That's not her. That's not her character. I don't know what you're saying. I don't agree." Because telling someone after the fact is it's not really helpful. They had no protection in that moment, right? And so you got to step up in that moment and say it then and there, right? Be really bold. Jennifer, they're asking for those resources in the chat, so we're going to need some of those resources. There's a great book. I'll have to find it too. My good friend Syra Rowe, her and her colleague wrote a book about white women and how they need to get it together and do better. So it's really good. So I'll find it and I'll include that in the resource as well too. We're almost out of time. Peter, can you share one strategy that you've used over the past 50 months for dealing with, we're bringing about change in Hanover County? People ask for just strategies in general with the administration, but since you've had so much work done in 50 months, I know you've done a lot. What's one thing that you think that you guys did to further your campaign to reduce the discipline for the young children in Hanover County?
Well, what comes to mind immediately was going to the school board and instead of reading a speech, taking out my ukulele and singing a song. It obviously the message then went through a different pathway into the school board members' brains, doing it musically, and there were some school board members who were against ending suspensions who clapped, thinking, "Okay, I think I actually got their attention," and I think that's important. Getting the attention of a very conservative, anti-public school board is really difficult. And so that does not discourage us. We have a commitment. Veronica McLaurin Brown, who I work with, says, we're going to keep doing this till they throw dirt on our grave. What you need to know is we keep showing up and actually are energized by their rejection of us, and know that people watch school board meetings on either when it's live streamed or can watch the recording after. There may be 30, 50 people in the room where the meeting happens, but there could easily be another 150 that are watching, and you want to get their attention too. If you're not musical, that's okay. Interpretive dances are always lovely. Doing artwork can do it. I think one of just one more quick example in trying to end the use of seclusion rooms, which are locked, padded closets that special education elementary students are put into. One way that we were able to end that was to actually have a string of paper dolls and just show how many seclusions there were in North Carolina in a given year and how many were in our school district. Most use of seclusion rooms actually was happening in New Hanover County. That visual presentation was much more powerful than any speech that we gave. So that would be my encouragement. Think about ways to get their attention.
All right. Well, that's going to have to do it, folks. We are right at the end of time. I cannot believe it. I told you these 2 hours would go by fast. We got through as many questions as we could. Again, we will send you everyone resources. It'll say day 1 resources. It'll be in the email that goes out tomorrow morning, along with an overview of what we have planned for day 2. We're focusing on truth. So we're going to keep going. Truth is a value. We have a lovely keynote from Jesse Hagopian, and we have a lovely panelist with Takima Bunch-Smith, who's been on one of our guests before, and 2 new folks that we're happy to introduce you to, Mama Fella and Key Gross. So please join us tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time for day 2 of the Summer Institute. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.